So thank you very much for coming here. Thank you very much for inviting us. Let me first of all introduce this hour briefly. About a year ago, about 2 years ago, there was a substantial increase in demand for a course on venture capital and angel funding by MBA students at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And I started developing this course, and Theresia joined this effort. And what we did is we created a one-quarter course completely from scratch on angel and venture capital funding and decision-making. And we would discuss, in this course, we discussed the whole value chain, from the seed stage, from the initial decision, from the first external funding, typically by outside angels, to the very late stage, to successful acquisitions or IPOs, and all the stages in between. And what we combined in this course is the, in a way, symbiosis between practical experiences, the best in practice that Theresia brings, and the fundamental insights from academic knowledge. This course was taught in the spring of this academic year for the first time. Was a huge success, even though we say this ourselves, and is going to be offered again in the fall. And what we're offering you today is 1 hour peek behind the curtain of this course. And the topic we chose is about the financial contracting between entrepreneurs on the one hand and angels and venture capitalists on the other hand.
So maybe to start with, how many people in the audience are entrepreneurs or founders, people who have sought funding, will seek funding? Okay. And how many people in the audience are investors of some sort? Okay. So for the the context of, Ilya uses the academic terms, contracting between venture capitalists, angels, and entrepreneurs, and really in common parlance for all of you, it's basically a discussion of the term sheet and the type of investment that we make. How many of you have raised a equity round of a preferred security? And how many of you have raised a convertible debt round? So Ilya is going to talk through why the structures are and why there are certain common practices, and why, contrary to popular belief, the types of securities and the way the norms of the contracts are set up actually are to align the incentives of the investors with the entrepreneurs, as opposed to creating an antagonistic working relationship. So even though it seems potentially arcane and you never really knew why preferred securities? Why not common securities? Because when we invest in public companies, we get common securities. There is actually a ton of incentive alignment and financial theory behind why things are the way they are. So.
Okay, great. And also, if you have any questions, please do ask them. We'll keep at least maybe 15, 20 minutes, if not more, for questions at the end of our talk. Well, first of all, let us show you the venture capital cycle. This is kind of the first slide of our course. And we started with self-founding founders, and then they raise the family and friends round. And where we start mostly is the angel round. So the first outside investors, typically who are professional angels. And then if you succeed, you proceed to the venture capital investment, and then followed by an M&A or an IPO, or the, as we call, liquidation event. So note that, of course, from the self-funding to venture capital investment, you can go to the next stage, or more likely, you go to the stage of failure. Really, maybe up to 9 out of 10, maybe more, seed investments at the end of the day fail. And quite likely that one of the reasons for failure is the way people write contracts or term sheets between financiers and entrepreneurs. Here is the main ideas behind the initial contracting or term sheet negotiations. Because when we ask people, especially entrepreneurs, what the term sheets are for, well, they think about, it's mostly about who owns what and who is going to be paid. In fact, it is very important to note that the term sheets, negotiation around term sheets provide a lot of other dimensions. which are important in the venture capital contract. So the first one is division of future payoffs. We're going to think about how we're going to divide what does not yet exist. And therefore, we need to try to predict various situations in the future. In this case, it's a very uncertain future. So we have to basically write a contract that tells us what is going to happen in the bad state of the world, where we're not in a good shape, what's going to happen in the very good shape, if we're very successful, and importantly, what's going to happen in the middle, in the kind of middle state, where more successful companies, in fact, end up with. Okay. Another feature which is really important for especially entrepreneurs to understand is learning. Term sheets, negotiations around term sheets is really about learning. Learning by venture capitalists or angels about entrepreneurs, or learning by entrepreneurs about venture capitalists. So here are just a couple of examples. If you are an entrepreneur and you are very rather naive or foolish about term sheets, so if venture capitalists approach you with a term sheet and you're so happy, you say, well, I'm okay with any term sheet, just let's sign up as quickly as possible, that is likely not a good sign. Well, why it is not a good sign? Because if you don't negotiate, if you don't bargain at all, then not unlikely you will behave the same with other parties, with your customers, with your suppliers, and you need to negotiate with them quite a lot. So that is not a good sign. On the other hand, if you're extremely tough, if you are crazy about every single fine print in the term sheet, and most of these points are really provided by the lawyers and play practically relatively, they're practically relatively unimportant, then potentially are too difficult to deal with. And maybe the message to the venture capitalist is that you're unreasonable. You actually don't know what is important, what is not important, and you are too just unpleasant to deal with. So maybe let's pass on. So this learning is really important. At this point, I always tell a story about an Indian venture capitalist who told me how he learns about prospective entrepreneurs. Now, in India, I'm not sure how many people here are from India, but in India, roads are not very good. And a journey that here in the valley will take about 10 minutes, there will take about 2 hours. He lives in Bombay. And he takes entrepreneurs in his car with air conditioning, but without a radio or music, for a 2-hour journey. And that means in Indian situation, 7-hour journey. And he told me that, over 7 hours, you can learn everything about a person. And that is his negotiation about term sheets. When I mention this to venture capitalists in the Valley, I actually think some of them are envious about that Indian guy, because if Theresia will take you on a 7-hour journey to San Francisco and back, it will kind of seem strange. But on the other hand, she would learn quite a lot about you. So learning is really important. And of course, you should try to learn as much as possible about venture capitalists, about their prior deals, about how they deal, how they work on the board, how they work with prior entrepreneurs. You should talk to entrepreneurs they invested previously. And the final idea about term sheets is that term sheets are already mentioned about the future payoffs. But in reality, they're about trying to resolve the inevitable conflicts that will arise in the future, especially if the business is successful. So it tries to resolve various agency conflicts that we're going to talk about in the way that is as painless as possible. So the way to think about the term sheet negotiation is that any venture capital and angel relationship is a very long-term relationship, kind of a marriage, okay? And so you should think about term sheet as a prenuptial agreement. So many couples, many people who marry, first of all, don't court each other long enough, okay? So don't negotiate in this context, and that may not be that good. Second is that, many people, when they marry, they don't write prenuptial agreements. And we know that in the United States and many other countries, the rate of divorce is really huge. So we need to minimize the pain as much as possible, okay?
Well, the only other thing that I would add, 2 points on this last point. Unlike a prenuptial agreement, regardless of whether your company is successful or not, the term sheet contract is going to determine the way you're going to separate what each party gets. So prenups only come into play in the case of a divorce. The last piece on learning that Ilya talked about, I just reiterate that because, certainly it is about the terms and conditions, and the pre-money and the post-money and the amount of money that you're raising. But it is so much more about, if you think about it, that if this is, a business partnership, business marriage, if you so to speak, on average, an early stage investment by an angel or venture capitalist, you'll be on the board of that company for 8 to 10 years. So that may be longer than many marriages in the United States. So you should really think about it in a serious way about understanding how well you will work together to build the company. And I think the other part about, not being too extreme on one side or the other with regards to the negotiation, the other aspect to someone who, as Ilya said, if you try to focus on every single term as opposed to focusing on the most important ones, I would say one of the biggest characteristics of successful entrepreneurs is their ability to prioritize and focus. There's a saying in venture that, great startups, the risk for a great startup is not starvation, but overeating, meaning there are way too many opportunities for any one great company or entrepreneur to pursue at any moment in time because the market is growing, their technology is hugely disruptive, or their business model is hugely disruptive. And it is the entrepreneur who is able to focus on the number one and number two most important priorities that is successful. So if you approach the term sheet negotiation or any other negotiation in that will be a very positive indicator to the other party that you are likely an incredibly successful and focused entrepreneur.
I completely agree with Theresia. So just one thing to emphasize more is that it's a long relationship, as Theresia said, 8 to 10 years. So in the course that we teach, a lot of protagonists, a lot of founders of a lot of companies come, and also venture capitalists that invest in them. And one thing that really struck me in every single case, we asked them about, so how at the end of the day did you decide to take money from that venture capitalist, not from other venture capitalists? And many of these companies had multiple offers. And also asked venture capitalists about why they decided to invest in this company. And of course there were a lot of answers. The technology is great, the venture capital fund has a name. But I think what struck me is that in every single case, at the end of the day, everybody said, I felt really comfortable with that person. I felt that I can survive a 5 to 10 year relationship with a person and we will be able to resolve conflicts. So that is very important. And also why it is important, not only because you're constantly interacting with that person, but because the future is very uncertain. And however, even if you write a fantastic term sheet, it won't be possible to predict everything. So therefore it's important to have interactions with people who are reasonable and with whom you feel comfortable to work and to disagree and to discuss challenges and problems. So let's move on and let's talk about some of the future problems that venture capitalists and angels and entrepreneurs that invest in need to resolve. Well, first of all is monitoring. I think one of the goals and that venture capitalists have is to monitor what's happening with entrepreneurial companies and how they do it. Well, first of all, as Theresia said, venture capitalists, especially lead VCs in multiple rounds, serve on boards. And board members do have fiduciary duties to their shareholders, and board members do interact with entrepreneurs, with the founders, with the CEOs on a permanent basis, depending on the stage, once a week, once a month. But obviously the board members, as Theresia will say, they help, they provide guidance, they try to seek new personnel, new human capital, but also they monitor, because their responsibility is to make sure that the entrepreneurs don't misbehave, obviously. There are also financial reports that the board members should receive, the shareholders should get from the company. And providing monthly financial report is important. Most of the startups, especially in pre-Series A, Series B, are not profitable. Some of them may not be even revenue positive. Why then the monthly reports are important? Well, two reasons. The first is the cost, keeping keeping tabs on the cost is important. Most successful startups fail because they run out of money. Second is because it disciplines the company quite a bit. Another interesting, I have interesting cases from India, I think because it's just a colorful country. Another Indian venture capitalist told me that he invested in a company that, a medical technology company that did not then provide any financial reports, even though he asked for financial reports. Well, he came to visit them and they showed them the new equipment they did. And when he asked them about financial reports, they said, well, why do you need financial reports? Our patients are very happy. Why do you need more? Well, 2 months after that, they requested for more money because there was another stage of funding. And he said, well, why do you need more money? Your patients are very happy. And I think after that, they started submitting him monthly financial reports. So that's a good learning experience. Which brings another important point, which is staging of investments. In the innovation funding, you will never get, really, unless you're extremely successful and become profitable very soon, you will never get all the money right away. There will be staging. And there are a number of reasons, and one of the reasons is monitoring, providing incentives to entrepreneurs, but also because of an option to learn. When venture capitalists such as Theresia invest in businesses, they know that many of these businesses will inevitably fail. They just don't know which one will fail. And this will give them an ability to learn and invest later on in more successful startups.
So I think one of the biggest things that any entrepreneur gets from their earlier stage investors is their ability to help them with figuring out when and how to do follow-on financings. I mean, I've been in the venture business for 15 years. I don't know, I've invested in a couple dozen companies, maybe more, maybe 30. But so therefore, through the course of that, if an average company does 5 or 6 venture rounds while they're still private, Ilya, right, before an exit. Right. So I've helped my companies raise over 150 follow-on rounds of financing on average, and a few IPOs and several acquisitions throughout that. Because I think the key thing is understanding, what are the milestones that a Series B investor will look at for your company versus a Series C investor versus a mezzanine round investor. And that will vary by the industry that you're in, the amount of capital that you need to raise for the type of business that you're pursuing, and so on and so forth. And that's a place where I think, a good angel or early stage venture investor really can add a ton of value. Because even if you're an experienced entrepreneur, I have some entrepreneurs, this is their 3rd or 4th company. That's terrific. So if they've done 4 companies, maybe they've done 20 follow-on financings. I've done 150. If I can't be helpful to you in that context, then I'm really not doing my job and earning my ownership in your company. And I think in addition, it's also knowing the types of investors. So I know I have a list of people that have done Series C financings for my consumer internet companies. That's very different than the people who do Series B financings in my security software companies. So I think looking at the track record of your investor, not only in terms of their successful outcomes, which is of course important, but those things take 10 years, right? So looking at the work that they've done for their companies along the way and asking the other entrepreneurs, hey, when you needed to raise your Series B, or I see that you just did a really successful Series C or mezzanine financing, how did your venture capitalist help you? That is probably that, along with the how much did your venture capitalist help you in recruiting a VP of engineering or a COO, or how much did your venture capitalist help you in getting that big corporate development partnership? Those are the types of questions that you should really be asking when you get access to talk to that person's other entrepreneurs. And the last thing that I would say, which I know will sound somewhat self-serving, but I think Ilya will verify this is true. In addition, the other thing that most of the companies that came in said, maybe not in every round, so in some rounds they were just optimizing on price and terms, but every entrepreneur who came in gave at least one example of a financing round where they had multiple offers and they chose a partner and a firm that was not the most financially attractive. It was close, it has to be competitive, but they don't always pick the most financially attractive for a lot of these other soft reasons when they do their references.
Yes, I actually think one typical mistake we see from especially first-time entrepreneurs is that they get excited about the offers they get, and they get excited about the pricing, so that where a couple of $1 million additional dollars in valuation seems like a great thing to them. Well, the truth is that their company, your company is still valued zero effectively unless you succeed in the future. This is not real money, okay? In every single company that we've seen in that course, and I think in most other successful cases where there were multiple offers, entrepreneurs, yes, they have to choose competitive, of course. But again, competitive in this case means you will not choose not competitive also because that venture capital is not reasonable, okay? Right. So just competitive, but the pricing itself is sometimes less important than first of all, a lot of other provisions of the term sheet. So again, the pricing is only one of provisions of the term sheet. We'll mention some of them. And second is that you have to be comfortable with the person, but also you, as Theresia said, you have to learn about that venture capitalist, whether the venture capitalist has the clear goal in mind for the company, what are the milestones, when the next round will be raised, who are potential Series B, C, D investors. And also I think that this particularly important, that maybe kind of needs to be emphasized, particularly important in the initial rounds. What typically happens is that when you sign up a Series A term sheet and raise Series A, then whenever you sign up the next round of investments, so you raise B, C, D, very often they will piggyback on your Series A term sheet, on your Series A conditions. And therefore choosing an attractive term sheet and a venture capitalist who will really help raising you good Series B and C, D is really more important. So I think we've seen more often cases where entrepreneurs will say, well, we chose, the pricing was not the most important on the agenda, more like in the early rounds. In the late rounds, especially successful, pricing becomes more important, also because it's more difficult to negotiate on other terms. Other terms are already in stone, set up in Series A, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So what else on this slide that we will talk about vesting a little bit later. I think dilution is also needs to be mentioned, which is the term sheets will tell you what is going to happen in the good state and the bad state. And in particular, you need to realize that if the company is not performing well, then either the company will close or there will be down round. And in the down round, more often than not, the stake of the previous round investors, but also the entrepreneurial stake, will be diluted. And you need to face this possibility. And again, a good term sheet will try to take this future problem into account. Now, Theresia already mentioned that this is the most common contract that is used in Silicon Valley, in the United States, and also used more and more commonly across the world. And this is called convertible preferred stock. Why it is convertible, why it is preferred stock? Now, it is preferred because venture capitalists are more senior in the capital structure than entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs typically will have common stock, and preferred stock is senior to common stock. Now, what does seniority mean? Is that in the case of liquidation, its venture capitalists will be reimbursed first, so to say, for the initial investment, and then only entrepreneurs will get a share in the pie. What is convertible? Convertible means that venture capitalists have the ability, the right to convert, to change their preferred stock into common stock, typically at their choice, so at the time of successful liquidation. So what is important to realize that convertible term and preferred term really exist for different situations, for very different outcomes. Preferred term is for kind of really down rounds or unsuccessful states. Okay. Now, when I say unsuccessful, doesn't mean that failure doesn't mean anything. But relatively unsuccessful round, which is venture capitalists as outside investors want to get protection in the down round. So that is where preferred term helps them. Convertible term really bites only in successful rounds. So in successful rounds, what happens is that it is, if venture capitalists don't convert, then preferred stock actually is not valued that much. But if you convert, then you will be valued at par with common shareholders, and you will get all the upside. So there's downside protection versus upside benefits. So it is important, and when
if I could, Ilya, he's the academic, so I'm just going to go with the very simple numbers, right? So what do both of those terms mean? If I'm investing $1 million in your company at a Series A, in the downside case, I'm going to choose to be there you go.
Okay.
See, he always has the pretty charts.
Okay.
So if your company gets sold for $1 million or for less than $1 million, I'm going to choose to stay preferred, take my $1 million back. If your company got sold for $2 million, I'd get $1 million and you'd get the other $1 million. However, if for my $1 million, say I owned 10% of your company, again, just to make the math easy for me, but your company got bought for $100 million, well, obviously I would elect to convert to common because I'd rather have 10% of the $100 million and get $10 million back than just get my $1 million. So for those of you who've been through this, I know it's fairly simplistic, but I think it's very interesting to note that what Ilya brings up is there's a reason why this is a security that actually, it works obviously for a VC who's got LPs and fiduciary responsibility. Look, at the worst case state, worst case is zero, but less than worst case state, I'll get my money back. If the company does well, then we could make a lot more than just our money back. But it actually also works well in aligning our incentives with entrepreneurs, because one of our worries is we invest $1 million, and if we didn't have the preferred feature, tomorrow, Google could offer to come and buy you for $2 million. And you're sitting there, you've been starving for 5 years, great, I'll get $1 million in my pocket. But for me as the VC, that's not a very good outcome because I'm only getting $1 million back, right? So we need to make sure that we align it so that even in the worst case state, at least we get our money back and you're not incented to sell the company for too little of an amount.
Right, well, let us show me an example of what Theresia was saying. The numbers are slightly different, but the intuition is exactly the same. So what happens? So we have here the exit liquidation payoff for the company in $1 million, and there we have the payoff of convertible preferred shares, so in this case venture capitalists. And for simplicity, we assume the convertible preferred stock is the only outside investment, okay? This line is common stock. So common stock is the most common instrument in the United States, but not common in the startup funding. But if it's converted, so over there it says converted, so if venture capitalists decide to convert, then this is how their payoff would look like. What happens if they decide not to convert? Then they will retain their preferred stock, and this is the preferred stock. So what happens at the downside, so here it's less than $10 million, what's happening is that the venture capitalists will get everything. So if the company here sold at $5 million, venture capitalists will get $5 million, and entrepreneurs will get zero. But then, as the company becomes more and more and more successful, preferred stockholders still will get, if unconverted, only $10 million. And the line over there, so the point over there at 40 million here in this example, is called a conversion point. So at this point is as optimal for venture capitalists to convert. And of course, they always do what is optimal for them and for their limited partners at the point of conversion. So this is kind of the point of divorce, of successful divorce, kind of. And so the black line, the blackboard line over there, really shows the payoff of venture capitalists. So if, in what I call the down state, so if the valuation is relatively low, then venture capitalists will not convert, and they will get preferred stock. And if the valuation is relatively positive, and of course in all successful case you can read about it's that scenario, they will convert. Now, Theresia also talked about the alignment. I think alignment of incentives is critical. What I like about convertible preferred stock is that it aligns incentives. First of all, it aligns incentives from two dimensions. First of all, it increases desire of entrepreneurs to make sure that successful upside will happen, because in the downside they will get zero. Okay, so that is the preferred stock incentive. And in the upside incentive is that entrepreneurs really want, so in addition to the example that Theresia gave, that entrepreneurs we don't want entrepreneurs to run tomorrow with their money. We also want entrepreneurs want to make sure that if I'm really successful and I come to Theresia and say, well, look, I need the new COO, then Theresia, who's my board member, will really put a lot of effort in trying to find me a new CEO or raise a new round or resolve a problem. Let's say we have an unconverted preferred stock. Well, Theresia will know that she will get maximum 10 million bucks, and then, you know, once she knows that the value is 40, 50 million, well, she would not really move a finger. And that would be optimal for her limited partners because she has fiduciary duty to her LPs. She would be better off doing something else for her LPs. So as you see, there is alignment of incentive. So this contract really resolves the alignment problems for both venture capitalists and entrepreneurs. And what this shows is the pair of diagrams, so how the share of the pie, how the pie is shared between venture capitalists, convertible preferred stock, and the common shareholders. Now, Theresia mentioned about importance of focus. In reality, of course, it's more complicated. In reality, you'll have a lot of rounds, you'll have employee stock, and the lawyers will enter, of course, the conversation. But I think fundamentally nothing changes really compared to this diagram. So you really need to focus on what's happening on the downside on the one hand and on the upside on the other hand. Okay. So I think we already discussed this. One other point why venture capitalists prefer convertible preferred stock rather than anything else is signaling. You know, venture capitalists want to make sure that entrepreneurs are optimistic, really believe in what they do. They really don't want to have an entrepreneur who say, well, maybe my business will succeed, maybe not, I'm not really sure. They want a driver behind the front seat. They want somebody who says, well, we're definitely going to succeed. And signaling in this case is important. If I come to Theresia and say, look, I have a fantastic business, but I don't really want common stock because I really want protection on the downside. Well, for Theresia it will be a signal that I am not optimistic enough, so I want protection. If on the other hand I say, I have a fantastic business, you know, I don't care about the downside because the downside will not happen. It's kind of a signaling, and it is one of the important components in venture capitalist decision and learning about both the entrepreneurs and the company.
The other signaling part of it is, you know, if an entrepreneur is willing to, you know, was unwilling to give me a preference on my money going in when I'm, especially in the early rounds where I'm not investing that much money in your company, that would be a very negative signal too, because it's like, really, you don't think you're going to make enough, you don't think you're going to grow the value of your company enough to pay me back my $1 million or my $5 million or my $10 million? Because obviously every early stage entrepreneur believes his or her company is worth, you know, $100 million or $1 billion. So that would be another reason. So it's both the fact that entrepreneurs will take common and that the entrepreneurs are willing to give away the preferred portion of whatever capital I'm investing in your company.
The term sheet has many other contractual features. And again, I think we can't really emphasize more the fact that many of these contractual features sound scary to entrepreneurs, quite potentially, especially to first-time entrepreneurs, but they're practically relatively unimportant. Now, some of the terms are more important than others, so let's just discuss. We don't have time to discuss all of them, but let's discuss a couple of points. So first of all, especially in the first round, in Series A, Series B, and for successful companies in all rounds, typically venture capitalists are minority shareholders. Especially in Series A, we'll almost always have the situation where venture capitalists are minority shareholder, and again, for venture capitalists, it's a good alignment of incentives. If a venture capitalist takes 60–70% in Series A, then, well, maybe entrepreneurs will not have enough incentives to work really hard. But because venture capitalists are minority shareholders, that means that they need to have some additional protection. And here are some examples of additional protection. The first one that is much talked about is anti-dilution provisions, which basically, on paper, provide protection for venture capitalists against dilution that might happen in the next rounds, especially the next round is a down round. So what happens if you invested $10 million and the next round is $2 million, and we need to raise more money, then of course the initial venture capital stake, the Series A stake, will be diluted much. Okay, so that's much talked about protection. In reality, anti-dilution protection doesn't bite as much because basically, you know, in the down round, if the company is still viable, everybody at the end of the day may be interested in the survival. The survival means you need to raise more money. And when you need to raise more money, you invite a new lead investor, let's say Series B or Series C investor. Well, the Series C investor, of course, needs, this investor is a new investor, okay? Doesn't have any history in this company, needs a competitive pricing, needs protection, and also needs compensation for his or her investment. So typically, the negotiation means that the anti-dilution protection is less important and is not implemented as much in practice, but it's always there on paper, right? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, corporate governance is sometimes important. A lot of board discussions and negotiations are informal. We had a very interesting case in our class where there was a non-trivial decision of whether to proceed with an IPO or proceed with an M&A transaction. And the founder and the CEO of the company basically said, well, what I did is when I made my decision, what I thought would be better for the shareholders, I knew that some of my board members may have a different opinion. What I did is really I talked to every single board member in advance. And so I sounded out their positions, but also I tried to convince them of my position. I just tried to reason with them, try to understand their reasons. And so when we came to the board meeting, basically the decision already was there. I actually think that is quite a smart move. Right?
Those are well-functioning boards, right? So I always say that, just like, anti-dilution provisions, I mean, people get very hung up on them. The reality is there are certain things which are in market for certain geographies and certain points in time, and 90% of the deals look pretty much like that, and they are geographic and time-specific. Same thing, corporate governance, I mean, the things that you'll see out there are pretty standard, and people, if they invest a certain amount, own enough of your company, they're gonna want a board seat. But I always say that the best functioning boards, there's never a board decision that's not unanimous. And I honestly, I can't think of a situation, unless it was extremely dysfunctional, which is not for public consumption, where we've ever had a board vote that was not unanimous. But I think that the fact that the CEO realized in advance that this, that reasonable minds with different financial incentives in the company at different price points might have different risk tolerance and might prefer a sale versus an IPO or vice versa. That was smart of the CEO to determine and to spend the time in advance such that we had a completely non-event board vote by the time the board meeting happened. A lot of CEOs and executives, and obviously, you're very busy, you're running companies, they're growing like mad, but taking this extra time to think about that and making sure that you're not surprising people in the board meeting. I mean, you think about your company 24/7, but your investor may be on 2, 3, 10 boards. So making sure you put yourself in that person's shoes so that they have the full data and feel like they are part of the decision process, as opposed to just showing up and realizing that, oh, actually half of the board's already decided what they're gonna do and I'm just expected to agree with everyone. That's not a feeling anyone would like, whether you're an investor, board member, or an entrepreneur board member.
Right. Well, just 2 points to add. First is that, so Theresia mentioned that the good boards always have unanimous decisions. Of course, it does not mean that there are no disagreements. There are a lot of disagreements. Sure. Just to provide more details about what Theresia said about financial incentives is that different board members have different incentives because they represent different parties. For example, let's say we have a board where one member represents Series A investors and another board member represents Series D investors. Well, Series A and Series D, let's say in a successful company, came up at very different pricing points, very different valuations. They have different shareholders, they have different limited partners, they have different incentives. So potentially they are in favor of different course of action, let's say M&A, IPO, and so on, okay? But good board members and well-functioning boards will smoothen these disagreements by reason and by talking to each other. And I think having the CEO who understands that and having board members who interact with other board members in other boards as well, yeah, is a great plus. Which brings me to the second point I wanted to make. Going back to the discussion about what entrepreneurs can learn about venture capitalists, I think one important point to learn about your venture capital is that you talk about is, okay, how this venture capitalist performed as a board member. Talk to, ask this venture capitalist, okay, what other boards you served on? Talk to the entrepreneurs on the boards. Talk to other board members, and so, well, what was basically the profile of that board member? I really think that is important, because if you have a dysfunctional board, and I'm sure it happens, okay, more often than potentially acknowledged. If you do have a dysfunctional board, then it can be really problematic. It's also inefficient. You will spend more time on trying to reason with your board and trying to, quiet and fighting than increasing the value of your company. Okay. So the vesting, of course, is also important. We have the next slide, so I'll miss it here. Now, two provisions which also entrepreneurs hung up a lot on, I think. Dividend restrictions, well, it's kind of unimportant for a very simple reason. Have you heard a lot about dividends that entrepreneurial startups pay? So not a lot. So redemption rights as well are relatively unimportant. Again, it depends on the market and geography, but I think if you want to focus on important provisions in your term sheets, I will not focus on either of these two. Let me skip this. We already talked about the board composition. Let's talk about vesting, because I think vesting is something that entrepreneurs do care about, and it's also important for VCs, and it is I think an important provision in the term sheet. When I say vesting, it means the vesting of the founders, but also I really include the provisions, the pool for future employees. First of all, a couple of definitions. There's called steep. There exists steep and cliff vesting. So steep vesting is typically kind of the vesting that happens over time. For example, the venture capitalists invest in you in Series A round, and then over the next 36 months, let's say, you will vest it in your common shares. And the economics of vesting is rather simple. We want to incentivize entrepreneurs not to leave the company. And if you leave the company tomorrow or in 12 months, then you will not get 100% of your shares. So we want really you to give all your human capital to the company. Cliff vesting is typically, as the name suggests, the vesting will occur at some point in the future at one time, and more often than not, the cliff and steep vesting combined. So an example here is that we'll have 30% cliff vesting after 1 year, and the remaining will be vested over time, smoothly over time, over the next 4 years. So one point that is kind of important to make is that do you remember that Theresia and I mentioned that whatever happens in Series A in the term sheet will kind of perpetuate. So if you make kind of a mistake, a blunder in Series A term sheet, it's a problem also because it will perpetuate in Series B, C, D, and so on. It's kind of the same here. So here is an example, maybe not of vesting of the founders, but let's say you hire your first your first employee. Of course, you want to attract the best employee, and you want to give this employee the best contract that you can imagine. Let's say you give this employee a really fantastic contract. Is it a good thing? Well, it seems a good thing because you can attract that employee. Well, what is a bad thing here? Well, the bad thing is that you will need then to attract employees number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10. And people who've been around the block will say, well, give me that contract. Give me the contract you gave to number 1. And then if you give 10 contracts like that, I think you will have substantial problems.
Yeah. So the one real-world example that is often brought up, so if you're hiring people, or even for yourself, you're trying to get, one of the key things is around what happens to me in what's often called a single or a double trigger. So what happens to me if the company, let's just take the double trigger meaning 2 triggers. Our company gets acquired, how much additional vesting acceleration do I get? And on the one hand, all founders and CEOs, of course, it's like, well, that's great. Like, especially if I'm the CEO, I'm going to get acquired. Clearly, I'm not going to, unlikely Google's going to make me CEO of their company, so I will have had the 2 triggers, and I want to get as much forward vesting as I can. And this point that Ilya brought up, this is where it often comes into play in reality is, I have to have conversations with founders say, that's great, but let's come up with something that's reasonable, both because, number one, you wouldn't want every employee in your company to have that deal, because then if Google's looking at what it's going to cost to acquire you, they're going to sit there and say, in addition, I've got to put big fat new packages in front of everybody in the company that I want to keep, because they're going to walk away with everything as soon as we get acquired. And then the second reason is what Ilya said, which is, it sounds great, you really, really want that CTO, or you really, really want that VP of sales. But realize then the next VP you hire or the next C-level person you hire is going to be savvy and is going to say, okay, well, is this the same amount of acceleration? Is this the same amount of protection? Is my employment contract or my vesting terms exactly the same as Ilya's? Because I know you just hired him like 3 months ago. So that's why the line you have to balance as the CEO, founder of your company is very much this. What's in the best interest, for yourself as an individual, but also what's in the best interest of the company overall, realizing that, if you're successful, you're going to need to recruit, hundreds, if not thousands of employees to your company before you have your exit.
Right. Well, Theresia and I can talk for a long time, especially I can talk because it's impossible to stop Professor talking, right? But we need to give time.
Yeah.
We need to give time for you to ask us any questions about this stuff. Yes, gentleman over there at the back.
Sure. Andrew, Georgetown Angels. A lot of times we're seeing, particularly some of these smaller startups get acquired for under 50 million, where it might be the management team that the buyer wants, right? And some of these are, people refer to these as aqua hires. Mm-hmm. Sometimes some of the economics are really going to the management team, right? And that's raising questions about, should the legal structure going in on some of these deals that look like they could be a quick tuck-in or move really fast, be changed to reflect that so that the angel investors or the venture capital investors, are kind of equally balancing that. And you don't have a disalignment,
right.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, so of course I agree with you that would be terrific. I think, we work in a supply-demand driven economy, and right now I think that the entrepreneurs have more leverage in general, even in the seed rounds. Although I would say in the seed rounds that's waned from my observation in this part of 2013 versus 12 to 18 months ago. So perhaps we will at least go back to 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we didn't see very many what we would call naked convertible debt rounds, right? Naked meaning no cap, no other protections, in which case, yeah, if that happens, then you get nothing. You basically get your money back in whatever 8% interest or that you've negotiated, which is not exciting for any of us. So I think at a minimum, we'll start to see, and I'm starting to see it, is going back to more priced angel rounds, where at least you've got the convertible preferred structure, and so it still might not be great, but you can convert to your equity position and you can share in that upside, because hopefully if they're getting bought for an acqui-hire, they haven't had a lot of paid-in capital and you can still make some money. I don't know that we're ever going to go back to the days that we had in the early, after the crash of 2000, where sometimes in those situations you're actually even able to negotiate, preferred with a 2 or 3x cap, exactly for that type of situation. But that's the way to align yourself, right? But market dynamics need to go back towards capital as opposed to entrepreneurs for that to happen.
Hi, this is a question here. Jay from YakTrack. I'm an entrepreneur. You spoke about alignment of entrepreneurs with investors in terms of an individual case. My question is there potentially a structural misalignment now between especially large VCs looking for the multi-billion-dollar swinging out of the park stuff, whereas you have entrepreneurs and angels perhaps quite happy in terms of their personal lives, accepting the accelerating rate of corporate acquisitions in maybe the $30-40 million range, And is it necessarily in the best interest of the entrepreneur to go on for 10, 15 years when they could exit and take a lot of money home as well?
You want to answer in terms of...
So actually
then I'll give
we missed
specific
we missed
examples.
one thing on the slides, I think. Let me go back to this to answer this question. It is a part of the term. It is a part of the. Okay, just a second. So it is in fact a part of the term sheet negotiations. What's going to happen really in this intermediate valuation, which is the liquidation preference and the optional conversion structures in the term sheet that basically will dictate to what extent it is optimal for the venture capitalist to exit at any particular valuation. Let's say, for example, if we have a very high liquidation preferences, then the entrepreneur will have much bigger alignment with the venture capitalist to exit at a much higher rate. Now, the truth of this business is that, of the venture capital business I mean, and when I say about venture capital business, I mean venture capitals are really in between entrepreneurs on the one hand and their investors who demand returns. So the truth of this business is that this is a business of rare successes and not of failures. And therefore, if venture capitalists will agree to all $30 million rounds, and then if we add up so many failures, then these venture capitalists will be very soon out of business. I think that is the truth of this business. Therefore, venture capitalists overall will prefer, especially if it's a successful case, to convince entrepreneurs to go for a much higher valuation. Yeah. But it can be featured, it can be structured to some extent during negotiations of the term sheet.
So to answer your question specifically, I think that what happens is there should be alignment, meaning so if that is the goal of the entrepreneur, look, I believe there are many businesses and many great entrepreneurs who should not raise venture capital. Many businesses who should not raise outside capital at all. And so if you have your goals, right, your goal is I would like to be out of this company for what we would call a quick turn in 12 to 24 months, and I can structure it so that I need no outside capital or just a little bit. Maybe I can get by with angel financing. Maybe I can get by with friends and family round. Maybe I only need $500,000 or $1 million to get to that outcome. Then yeah, that's great, because then, if you sell for $40 million, depending on what your ownership is, you'll get 30 or something $million. So I would say know what your goals are going in and make sure your capital raising both amount and strategy in terms of who you're raising capital from, if at all, is aligned with your own personal goals. You're exactly right. I think most good VCs are very clear and upfront about it. My goal, in the venture returns in the business, right? It's always, it's totally true. The median return, you don't want to invest in a medium venture capital fund. You won't make money. You'll lose money. So everybody wants to be in the top 10%, top 1%. And how do you get there? Is you do get there by getting into the ones that end up being not only 10x, but 100,000x returns. So, you make sure you're aligning yourself, whether it's a VC or an angel, both in terms of their philosophy, and then make sure the contract terms reflect that philosophy so that you're aligned in the outcome state, which is what your most likely outcome state is, the one you're trying to drive to. I think that VCs aren't and shouldn't be apologetic about, we want to invest behind entrepreneurs who are excited about building the next big thing. And we know that a lot of times it won't work out, but that's got to be the goal in the Series A is, I want to be the next new company disrupting industry XYZ, and I'm willing to wait 10 years if that's what it takes, because in 10 years, the company that I was on the board for 10, it's $1 billion company. So I don't know, for that entrepreneur, was it worth it to wait 10 years instead of 2 years to get $1 billion versus 50 million? Well, with the certainty of history, I'm pretty sure they'd say yes. Obviously, there was a lot of uncertainty along the way, and they might have questioned those decisions to turn down those early acquisitions. But that's why you absolutely want to have these discussions up front. This is part of the diligence and getting to know one another. It's important. You need to have the same goals, just like you would want to have the same goals in life with your life partner. You want to have the same goals in life with your business partner.
And Theresia said that the median return on a fund, so the return on a median fund is negative. Well, the return on a median investment in a fund is minus 100%, basically. So that's why it's really important for venture capitalists to be successful and to get into at least one company in the fund that will provide 100 or ideally thousands X. So that's important. Right, do we have time for more questions?
Just one.
I have a question, Theresia, right? Hi. What happens in the very early stage when you like entrepreneur or the company? What is the process that follows? Like you like the company, you met with him. At what point you give an offer? What is the process inside that happens with the partners? How long the entrepreneur is supposed to wait for the next step and for the check? And at which point he should just say, well, you know, to take the other offer or move on with the alternative?
So the headline answer is it varies a lot from fund to fund and partner to partner. But in general, what I would say is, you know, I think as an entrepreneur, after you have your first meeting with a potential investor, you can tell in that meeting how interested that person is. Are they asking questions? Are they engaged? Is there a follow-up? Who's prompting for the follow-up? Are you, as the entrepreneur, emailing and calling them and saying, hey, do you want to meet again? That's probably not the greatest sign that they're super interested. They might be busy, but probably if I'm very interested, most other investors, if you're really interested in a deal, you're going to follow up with them. It's just like any other potential sort of courting relationship, right? So who's the one reaching out? To set realistic expectations, I think, you know, there's always examples of, you know, yes, there's the example of the company who gets a term sheet and, you know, within 24 to 48 hours of a first meeting. But on average, I would say for an early stage investment where there's some diligence but not that much to do, you might expect, you know, 2 to 4 weeks worth of meetings, right? Not meeting every single day, but based on that person's board schedule, other travel. But they should be contacting you saying like, I'd like to see you in a week, or I would like to get a list of your customers so that I can call and do references. And they should be offering you contacts into their networks because they want to, that's the beginning of them having you vet them. And then I think realistically, you know, usually there is a partnership meeting, or if it's an individual investor, there's not, right? But then you should just ask the individual. There's a final meeting where there's an investment recommendation. You would present to the partnership group and sort of talk to your story, and then you should get within 24 to 48 hours of that a term sheet or not. The last part, though, which I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't bake in enough time for, this contracting is all about the term sheet, but going from the term sheet to the full documents and getting money in the bank, I think on average takes more like 6-ish weeks at the end of the process. So don't forget to bake that in before you think you're going to get the check. You know, you're not going to walk out of the partners meeting, no matter how much they love you, with a big giant check.
It's about 3 months.
It's. I think it probably from start to finish, it's about 3 months. Hopefully, it's about 2 or 3 months for you to get to the point of a term sheet, and then, you know, 6-ish weeks to actually get money in the bank. That's if it's successful. If it's not successful, it can take a lot longer. So, all right, good. Do we have time, or do we need to go?
I have a question to Theresia. In the last couple of years, there's been a huge growth of angels and angel funds. And so some of them are here in the audience. And my question is, do you work with angels? And if so, then how do you work? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, absolutely. So I personally, and then our fund in general, we do work a lot with angels. So, you know, we have, like many other top venture funds over the last 3, 4, 5 years, we've become even more focused on the early stage and seed or angel side of it. And in the angel business, you know, for us, we view that as sort of upstream network of getting early insight into companies that might be candidates for full venture rounds at some point in the future. So we very much work collaboratively with other angel investors. That is or angel funds. That is the core of what you do. That is where you spend your time. We are not trying to, you know, put a bunch of money to work and pollute these companies with too much capital too early. We want to partner with smart angels, and there's a couple of angel funds that I've probably done half a dozen deals with that particular partner at that particular fund, because we are interested in the same sectors, and he knows that, if he tees up a deal to me or I tee up a deal to him, that, I'm gonna try to take only half of it or less. I just want to make sure that I'm part of that process, and that I will, if I do good work for the company, even though I wouldn't be on the board at that stage, if I'm helpful in making introductions, that I would expect to get an early look at the venture round down the road. And so we view it as a very good thing, and we see ourselves as being partners to those groups completely. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think they're coming.
Okay. So that brings up a really interesting question, since you just covered a bunch of term sheet stuff. So what are some examples of angel deal term sheets that show themselves as problems for you as somebody grows into the financial requirements of your VC firm?
Right. Well,
does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll give you two actual type examples, and I don't know if Ilya has a greater body of data around this. So the only times there's a problem with a, quote, a problem structurally with an angel round term sheet are at the two extremes. One extreme, which is that, it's an angel round investment that's done as equity, maybe as an incubation, where the angel ends up owning 40, 50% of the company, right? Not all in preferred. They say, oh, well, we did an investment, we only own 10 or 15% in preferred, but because, I was actually incubating the company in my offices, which nothing against that, but then they end up, they're a majority owner, and that's a problem for a new investor coming in, because now you don't really look like an investor, you look more like management, and there are conflicts there in terms of, well, how do I, as a Series A investor, get the ownership that I want to have? Most Series A investors want to own 20+% of the company, right? So it just makes the math challenging, because we don't want to squeeze out the entrepreneur, because that doesn't leave a whole lot for them if you're going to continue to own 50% and I'm going to own 20. At the other extreme, which I touched on a little bit when the other gentleman asked, I think when we have completely uncapped convertible debt rounds, it's not necessarily a problem from a cap table perspective. We're happy to set the price and the terms in the Series A, but it can create problems where, the angel investors who normally we work with as partners, and we obviously see as investors, their incentives are no longer aligned with ours, right? They're really aligned with management, and they're just trying to get the highest price possible. Nothing wrong with that, right? But it's just sort of, when someone tees up a deal to me, I look at it differently if they're an investor and I see myself as being someone aligned with them. Of course, they want to get a nice markup for the work that they've done, but they're thinking about the company like an investor, as opposed to when you have essentially common stock. You're thinking about it like an entrepreneur. Nothing wrong with that, but now I'm negotiating with two sets of entrepreneurs, right? The angels as well as the actual entrepreneurs. And so those are the two extremes.
I would just add that venture capitalists don't really like complex cap tables.
Yes.
So if you raise a lot of different angel rounds from a lot of different angel investors with different terms, each of them having different terms, that definitely will create a problem. Or if you have very specific contract terms between co-founders. In the case of many founders, 2, 3, 4 co-founders, each of them having very specific terms, I don't think venture capitalists will like that, because that will complicate future funding. Right.
Theresia, I guess the opposite question from Dave's. So obviously, Lilia Sherman's with Golden Seeds. So we don't want to, as an angel, we don't want to overprice early rounds, right? We want to think about follow-on. But on the other hand, what would you say should angels do when they're investing very early to protect themselves from basically being, completely diluted out in subsequent rounds?
You mean in the case where you're not pricing equity and you're doing convertible debt, or even when you do preferred equity? Even
when you're doing preferred, what are some of the things the angels should put in place as protection?
So if you're doing preferred equity, I think that you should put in things like pro rata rights, which we would normally put into ours as well. And again, as long as you're owning a reasonable percentage of the company, typically in an angel round, maybe something like 10-ish%, maybe up to 20, then that's fine. It's not going to create a problem. There's still plenty of room in the cap table for a 25% type Series A owner and plenty of room for a pool and the founders, right? I think in convertible debt rounds, I do think putting a cap on the conversion price, not just a discount, but a cap, is the best protection for an angel round investor. So, look, it's like everything else when I say the market terms are what they are. There was a time not that long ago when my firm and I said, we will never do, debt rounds because we're in the equity business. Well, find an attractive enough seed opportunity and that's all they're going to do and the market's at the, okay. But then we try to at least get a cap on our conversion price into the next round. And my argument there, and hopefully Ilya's academic research will verify this when I talk to the entrepreneurs, is you actually want to align us a little bit with you as the entrepreneur, right? Because if not, then if it's just I get whatever, a 5% or 10% or 20% discount, but the price can float as high as possible, then I'm going to be incented to have you go out and talk to funders sooner rather than later before you can run the price up to something crazy, right? But here, if there's a cap on it, then I know and I can do the math and say, okay, this is fine, this is good, I'm gonna own whatever I'm gonna own, and I'm gonna give you the time to make whatever progress you wanna make before I start letting loose all my VC friends who I'm gonna call up, because there's no more, now my incentives are aligned with yours. Not having a cap actually misaligns me with the entrepreneur as the seed investor, and so sometimes I prevail in that, and that would be my recommendation.
I think what Theresia is saying really is that convertible note is a note if there is no cap. And it's really becoming a debt instrument in the successful case. And therefore, if the valuation is really high, then the angel investors are going to be diluted. So venture capitalists don't like it because obviously they will not get any cooperation from angel investors if the pricing round is high. And angel investors getting very unhappy about it. So we had one case in our class where angel investors invested without a cap because they knew the founders, they trusted in founders. They thought the next round will be $5 million. It turned out to be the company is very successful. The round was $25–30 million. Well, angels said, we'll never invest in this stuff ever again. And the reason was the absence of a cap. So what cap really does is provides the upside protection. It's like the convertible notion. I think what is a misnomer is there's some confusion out there that I see is that when people say convertible note, they think that it's the same as convertible preferred stock, which is the same convertible term, and it is not. Okay, so convertible note, well, convertible term has nothing to do with the convertible preferred stock and the convertible term with the convertible preferred stock. You need to have a cap. So the cap is in fact exactly the same provision as the convertible term, as the convertible preferred stock. And in a way it provides a partial valuation, a partial pricing of this round. I think we're out of time, but thank you very much indeed to the organizers for inviting us, and thank you very much for listening and questions.